Hi, my name is Michael Bazushko. I'm a librarian here at Kent, and today we're just going to be talking about developing a research question and a thesis when you're working on research here at SEMO. So, what are a research question and thesis? What are these things? A research question is a clear, focused, and researchable question that guides a study or paper. And we're going to break this down a little bit. And a thesis is a specific claim or argument that you will defend or explain in your paper. So, to make it very simple, a research question is just the question you want to answer. What are you going to study? And the thesis is the answer to that question. You're going to start your paper and say, here's what I'm arguing in this paper based on my research. So that's how to think about these things very simply. So I'm going to give you an example from when I was in college. I was in a history class, and the history class was about this area, the Pacific Rim, this whole area around the Pacific Ocean here. And for our final paper, our professor said we can write whatever we want as long as it's about this area. So I kind of looked at the map and, I saw Hollywood over here, and I said, well, I love movies. Maybe I could just write about movies, right? Hollywood's right there. So let's go ahead and think about what paper I could write. So I said, I love movies. Jurassic Park here, that's a focus. That's pretty clear, but I can't just write about all American movies, right? Just a bunch of Hollywood movies, and that's my paper. I mean, that's too many movies. So I needed to focus it a little bit. And I said, well, I like Japanese movies as well, and that's in the Pacific Rim. Okay, I could maybe compare American movies and Japanese movies. So that's much more focused, right? But there's still a lot of movies there. And I said, well, maybe I can find one subset of movies, one kind of movie that both Americans have made and Japanese have made. And I could research that. So I thought about the history between these two places. And I said, well, what's something they share? What's a piece of history they share? And obviously, being a history student, I said, the atomic bomb. So I figured maybe I could write paper about atomic bomb films from both Japan and America. And I could see kind of how they compared and what differences there were. And I thought, well, that's pretty good. I really focused my paper here. I've narrowed it down. It's pretty clear. I just have to watch movies that feature things about the atomic bomb. I said, that's a pretty good idea. So my research question was, what are the differences in how American movies and Japanese movies have portrayed the atomic bomb over time? And over time is a little vague. It's not focused enough, but I'll show you how I changed that as I went. My original thesis was American movies take the bomb less serious than Japanese movies, because I was watching some of these early atomic bomb movies, and of course the Japanese had experienced the horrors of the atomic bomb, and Americans had used the atomic bomb, but on the other side of an ocean, so it didn't have the same kind of impact that it did maybe in Japan. So that was my original thesis. So I started watching movies, and I watched Japanese movies, and it turned out that Japanese movies, they were kind of warnings about the atomic bomb, and then they went over the history of some stuff that they experienced. And then they started dealing more with the aftermath and the effects of atomic bomb years later. Whereas American films, as I started seeing in the 80s and into the 90s here, we did start getting movies that were much more like the original warnings that we saw coming from early Japanese films. I said, well, that's really interesting. So I still had my research question. What are the differences between these two types of movies? But my thesis, it changed over time. Instead of American movies take the bomb less seriously than Japanese movies, it was American films became more similar to Japanese films during the Cold War as nuclear armament increased throughout the world. So that's the first thing. It's okay to change your thesis. It probably will change. As you do research and you learn more about your research question, you might change your thesis, and that's totally okay. So that's just an example from my past. So let's look at some other examples and see some pros and cons and how we might fix these examples. So remember, our research question, we want to be clear, focused, and researchable. We have to be able to actually do the research. So, is the government hiding stuff from us? That, as a research question, how is that? Well, it's pretty unclear, pretty unfocused. For one, stuff. What stuff are we talking about? Let's narrow that down a little bit. Let's say aliens. Is the government hiding aliens from us? Okay, that's much more clear. But who is the government, right? Who would be hiding these aliens? Well, we need to focus on some bureau or branch Let's go with the Department of Defense. Is the Department of Defense hiding aliens from us? Okay. We're a little more clear and focused now, but is it researchable? Well, maybe not, right? There's a lot of documents that are redacted, and I'm not sure we're going to be able to find this information anyway. This might not be a great research question to embark on. So let's move on. Let's try to find something a little more clear, focused, and researchable. How does sleep deprivation affect people? Okay, that sounds more reasonable, but we still have some vague things happening here. For one, sleep deprivation. What do we mean by that? The person hasn't slept all night, or they haven't slept in a month. What do we mean? So let's say chronic sleep deprivation, right? We're just going to be focusing on that one thing. Somebody who hasn't slept in a long time, they've really been suffering for a while. But what about people? Any people? Let's focus on maybe one set of people, young adults. How does chronic sleep deprivation affect young adults? All right, that's much more clear and focused, right? But there's one more thing we can do. What do we mean by affect? How does it affect them? How will we know if it affects them? We have to be able to measure something, right? So let's say short-term memory. How does chronic sleep deprivation affect short-term memory in young adults? So we know exactly who we're studying, what we're looking for. I think this is pretty clear, focused, and researchable, right? What our thesis might be is a specific claim or argument that we're going to defend. Well, maybe we'll say, I think chronic sleep deprivation in young adults causes a loss in short-term memory. That's going to be my assumption, my thesis. Let's see if it changes, right? So we'll get to work. Maybe we'll say, I'm sure other people have studied this. We'll read their papers. We'll read some books that are out there. Maybe we'll do our own study. If we're really ambitious, we could do our own study. So we go through all the information that exists. We maybe do our own information study as well. And in the end, we say, all right, has our thesis changed? Maybe it has. Maybe we just change a little bit. It says, well, it turns out it does, but only temporarily. It causes a temporary loss of short-term memory, which is a small change, but it's really important. It's okay to change your thesis a lot, too. If you find that chronic sleep deprivation is great for short-term memory in young adults, well, you'd change your thesis. I don't suspect that to be the case, but if you do the research, let me know. So make sure that when you do your research, be okay with changing your thesis. So final reminders about coming up with a research question and a thesis. A research question is the question you want to answer. It has to be clear, focused, and researchable. The thesis is the answer to your question, and it's okay if your answer changes. That's pretty normal. If you have more questions about things like this, there's an Ask Us button on the Kent Library website, and there are plenty of ways to get in touch with librarians. You can come in person. We're usually at the front desk. You can email us, you can call us, whatever works for you, and we can help you answer some of these questions. Thank you.